Hello there, it's Steph here at Bead Shop in Nottingham again, and I'm going to be showing you how to make a really simple, slightly wavy bead bracelet, which is a really nice, simple thing to get into a bit of beading. It uses 2-hole Superduo beads and the really nice new faceted True2s, which are a 2mm faceted bead in a matching colour to the Superduo, so it'll be a really elegant bracelet. This is the pastel purple version of the bracelet. I've created a bead woven button for the clasp rather than having an actual trigger clasp or anything else. It's a nice design feature having a button and a loop actually incorporated into the bracelet. And it works really nicely having the 2 beads matching. So I'm going to use the pastel petrol Superduos and True2 beads for this bracelet. And I'm also going to be using Supple Max thread in 0.25 diameter thread, which gives you a little bit of give in the bracelet. One really good tip when working with clear thread is to just colour in the very ends of the thread with a marker pen. You can do it with nail varnish as well, but it just means that you can see it against your beading mat. So to start with, we're going to make the button part of the bracelet, and for this we need 7 of each type of bead, and you start by picking up 7 Superduos, and then you thread the end of the thread through the very first Superduo through the same hole in the same direction, so you're actually creating a small loop. It's worth checking here that your loop of beads is also approximately in the centre of your thread. And then take one of the threads and pass it through the second hole in one of the Superduo beads. And you can tighten up the beads a little bit here. And this diagram will help see the thread path, which is always quite useful. So now using the thread that you've taken through the second hole of the Superduo, you're going to add the True2 beads in between each of the Superduos. So it's basically filling the gap in between each pair of Superduos. Using small beads is definitely easier said than done, so I sped this bit up. Obviously you can pause the video at any point to help you when you're making your bracelet. Once you've added all 7 of the True2 beads, you want to finish by going through the last Superduo, and then when you pull the thread up tight you get the basic shape of the button. This diagram again shows the thread path, which is quite useful. The red bit being the most recently added part of the diagram. Next, thread round the outside edge halfway round the button, and you're going to end up opposite the other end of the thread. The next bit we need to do is to thread back through the same Superduo, which is highlighted on the diagram here with the arrow. So it's going to be coming out in the centre of the button. Then you're going to use both threads for this bit and cross over in a True2 bead. So that's both ends going through the same bead in opposite directions. And then when you pull the 2 threads tight, that little True2 bead is going to sit right in the centre of the button. Because there's 7 beads in our button, 7 Superduos, it's sitting slightly off centre at this stage. So by threading round the inside part of the Superduos halfway round and then anchoring through the True2 again, we can make it sit a little bit more centrally. Again, it's a little bit fiddly this bit, so I've sped it up, but it's worth taking your time to get around to the other side of the button. And again, I've inserted a diagram here so that you can actually see where the thread path is going. The blue thread is the other thread from the beginning, and the red thread is our working thread at the moment. The next thing we need to do is to thread our both ends of the threads through to the back of the button, the back being the slightly curved in side. And then once both threads are through to the back, we need to add another True2 bead. We're going to add this in exactly the same way. So using both ends of the thread, I'm going to pick up a new bead and cross over inside. So that's both threads going through in opposite directions. And then when you pull it down, it will sit directly on top of the True2 in the middle of the button. I hope you can see that there. And then we're going to do that again, so adding a third one this time. And the reason for doing this is so that there's movement in the button before actually adding the beads for the bracelet. If it was really, really close up, you wouldn't be able to get the loop that we're going to make at the end of the bracelet around the button to sit flat. So now we can start building up the main part of the bracelet. So we need some more Superduos and True2s for this bit. There's a small section pattern that is repeated over and over. So this is the formation. The Superduo and True2 at the right is just the starting point for the row, and then the section in the middle is just repeated over and over. So to get started, I tend to use one thread and work all my beads for a small section on one thread and then join in the second thread. So these beads can be a little bit pesky at times. So starting with two Superduos, one True2 bead, a Superduo, another True2, which are on there now. And then we need more Superduos. So sometimes it's easier to pick the beads up, sometimes it's easier to scoop them from the mat. I know from teaching workshops that everyone has their own way that works for them. So there's no wrong or right way for this, it's whatever works best for you. So once the first small section is complete, I'm going to thread the second thread up. So those first two Superduos are just forming the beginning of the bracelet. Because it's built up in waves, you actually want to start the bracelet halfway through a wave, because if you started at the beginning of a wave, you'd end up with the bracelet sitting slightly wonky. So that's why there's the few beads at the start and then the pattern repeat starts afterwards. So now just threading the second thread. So this is slightly different in that obviously you're not adding any Superduos because they've got two holes. You're actually just anchoring through those beads at this point and just adding in the True2s. So to get the wavy effect, on where the first thread has the True2s, the second thread doesn't, and that's how you get the wavy effect. So it's pulling the tension tight on different parts of the thread. Can be a little bit fiddly to begin with, but once you get into the swing of things, it all comes together quite nicely. It's always a good idea to make sure that all your Superduos are sat the right way, because it can be quite easy if one's sat away from your thread to miss one out. So it's always worth checking. We nearly have the first pattern repeat complete. Here we go. So as you're threading the beads, they will want to sit quite loosely to begin with, but you actually sort the tension out and bring everything together nice and tightly right at the very end. But this is the sort of effect that you will get. So they will look very much like this all the way along the bracelet as you're building it up, and then when you pull the threads tight you will get a wavy effect, which is really effective. So it will eventually all come together like this. This next diagram shows very clearly the pattern repeat again. It also has a diagram at the bottom showing the multiple repeats and how they build up. It's also important to note on here, I've explained how to make your bracelet longer or shorter. So it's really important to either take out or add in full pattern repeats to make the bracelet work. The end bit and the left and right sides are what's needed to be added to either side to make the bracelet sit nice and straight. I often find it easier to thread one whole side of the bracelet first using just one strand and then do the second strand afterwards. You could do it in sections at a time using both strands. Either way works absolutely fine and you get the same end result. So once both threads are all threaded up and you've got it the right size, you need to move up all the beads to get the tension really tight. So that's what's going to create the wavy effect. It's worth taking your time with that. It is a little bit fiddly and a little bit time consuming, but the end result will be worth spending that little bit of time doing. And then the final bit we need to do is to add our loop so we can actually have a closure. So for that I'm going to use 15 True2 beads at the very end. So you thread them all onto one strand and then you take the second strand down the same 15 beads, all of them. So A, it makes it stronger, and B, you have both threads going all the way through. And then when you put it up tight, you end up with a neat loop. And the last thing we need to do is to fasten off the ends. So we'll be tying knots. But it's really important to make sure that as you're threading through the last few beads and tying a knot, you don't lose the tension in the rest of the bracelet. So the first thing we need to do is to take each thread through the first Superduo bead. So it'll be the one on the left will be going down the left side of the Superduo and the right on the right side, so that we could be tying knots after the Superduo. Just makes it a little bit more secure and gives you the opportunity to be able to pull your threads a bit tighter. So there we go. That one's going down there. It's a little bit fiddly, but it gets there in the end. Sorry, having zoomed in, it's quite tricky to keep your hands in the centre of the screen, so I do apologise about that. There we go. So both threads are now through the Superduo bead. And then to tie knots effectively, rather than tying threads together, I'm going to be taking each thread around the thread in between the beads. So I'm going to take this thread underneath the thread there, so in between the two beads where my thread's coming out of, and that's going to create a loop. I'm going to take the end of the thread through the loop and then pull that really tight, and that's going to create a really secure knot around the thread. So pull that down really, really tightly. And then all you do to finish is to thread the remaining tail of the thread down through a few beads before chopping off the excess, and you repeat the same to the other side. And there we have a finished tutorial. You'll find a full list of the materials used to make these bracelets underneath the video, with links to where you can buy the items as well. Feel free to follow us on all of these social media platforms. All the links you'll also find below. Thanks for watching.